From the Shroud of Turin to the Holy Grail itself, today we explain every major Christian relic. Let's begin. Shroud of Turin. Imagine someone leaving you a sort of photograph, but not one taken with a camera. Instead, it's imprinted on a cloth over 2,000 years old. And that image appears to be Jesus of Nazareth. This is the Shroud of Turin, one of Christianity's most revered yet debated relics, fascinating believers, scientists, and skeptics alike for centuries. What exactly is it? It's a linen cloth measuring around 14 feet by 3.5 feet, displaying the front and back image of a man brutally tortured, scourged, crowned with thorns, nailed through hands and feet, and bearing a deep wound on his side, precisely matching the gospel descriptions of Christ's passion, the Holy Grail. What if I told you that the most sought-after cup in history isn't made of gold or encrusted with precious stones, but may have gone unnoticed for centuries, and that, according to many, was touched by God-made man? Let me introduce you to the Holy Grail, the cup that, according to Christian tradition, Jesus used during the Last Supper. That same night when he broke the bread, lifted the cup, and spoke the words that millions still repeat today. "This is the chalice of my blood." But that's just the beginning. Some legends claim that this same cup was later used to collect Jesus' blood at the Crucifixion. And ever since, it's been the most coveted object by kings, crusaders, monks, Templars, even the Nazis. The first time the Grail appears in history is in the 12th century in the tales of King Arthur. There, it becomes the sacred prize of a spiritual quest reserved only for the pure of heart. But behind the stories and knights in shining armor, there's a real history. In the Cathedral of Valencia, Spain, what many believe to be the authentic Holy Grail is preserved, a chalice made of agate, over 2,000 years old. It has been used in Mass by Pope Benedict XVI and also by Pope John Paul II. How did it get there? According to records, it was brought from Jerusalem to Rome by St. Peter and later taken to Spain for safekeeping during times of persecution. Other so-called grails are claimed in places like Genoa, Leon, or even Celtic lands. But only one has withstood the test of time with credible documentation, the one in Valencia. So why is it considered a relic? Because if it truly was the cup Jesus held during the Last Supper, then it was a direct witness to the beginning of the Eucharist, one of the most sacred acts in Christianity, a relic of intimate contact, used by Christ himself at one of the most profound moments of his life. The Holy Grail is more than just an ancient cup, it's a symbol of faith, mystery, and spiritual power. The crown of thorns. Imagine someone hands you a crown, but it's not made of gold. It's made of thorns, and it doesn't symbolize power, but humiliation, mockery, and pain. This was the royal crown placed on Jesus before his death. And what makes this story even more powerful is that the crown still exists, or at least part of it does. According to the Gospel of John, Jesus was mocked by Roman soldiers just before being crucified. They dressed him in a purple robe and, in cruel irony, crowned him with thorns. But these weren't ornamental. They were like natural needles, over 10 centimeters, 4 inches long, piercing his scalp, a crown of pain, a crown of humiliation, and yet that crown was preserved. Tradition holds that it was kept by the early Christians in Jerusalem, later brought to Constantinople. In 1238, the Byzantine Emperor Baldwin II, deep in debt and desperate, offered it as collateral for a loan to King Louis IX of France. Louis bought it and brought it to Paris, where he built a sanctuary specifically for it, Sainte-Chapelle, a Gothic masterpiece created solely to house this relic. There it remained for centuries, until the French Revolution. Eventually, it was moved to Notre Dame Cathedral, stored in a glass case and protected by the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. And what became of the crown? Did it survive? Yes. When Notre Dame caught fire in 2019, the crown was nearly lost. But in a scene straight out of a movie, firefighters rescued it from the flames and smoke just as the roof was collapsing. Today, what remains is a woven ring of reed branches. The original Thorns, about 70 of them were given away over the centuries as relics to other churches, but the core of the crown still rests in Paris. Why is it considered a relic? Because it touched the very head of Jesus in his darkest hour. It isn't a symbol of human power. It's a symbol of a love that accepts suffering without resistance. The crown of thorns doesn't represent victory or grandeur. It represents something far deeper, the choice to suffer out of love. Eucharistic miracles. The priest lifts the host. Silence fills the room, but this time, something is different. The white wafer begins to change color. A reddish hue appears. Blood. And what was once bread now looks like living flesh. These aren't just symbols. They are documented events that have astonished even doctors and scientists. They're known as Eucharistic miracles, and they've occurred in different parts of the world. They happen unexpectedly when the consecrated host visibly transforms into flesh and blood. 8th century in Lanciano, Italy. A monk plagued by doubts about whether Christ was truly present in the Eucharist when the host began to bleed. Since then, the Church has preserved the remains. And what's astonishing is that more than 1,200 years later, they remain intact. In 1970, Dr. Eduardo Linoli, a renowned forensic pathologist, analyzed the samples. The result? Human flesh, heart tissue. Blood type AB, the same as that found on the Shroud of Turin, and the blood was fresh, with intact proteins. Similar cases have been documented in Poland, Mexico, Italy, and also in Buenos Aires, 1996. There, a host left in water to dissolve turned into a piece of tissue. Labs in the United States confirmed it was live human heart muscle from someone who had endured extreme agony. The scientists who examined the samples all said the same thing. There's no natural explanation for this. And no, they weren't believers, they were clinical experts, stunned by what they saw under the microscope. Today, these remains are preserved as living relics. They don't contain bones or objects from saints, but they're considered relics because they represent the real presence of Jesus, visible, physical, and deeply moving. The column of the flagellation, a body bound and exposed, waiting for the first strike. In front of him, a column. Each lash tore through skin and muscle, but he remained there, unmoving. That column still exists, and it witnessed everything. We're talking about the column of the flagellation, a silent relic forgotten by many, yet one that may have stood at the heart of one of the most brutal moments in Christ's passion. According to the Gospels, Jesus was arrested, brought before Pilate, and then sentenced to be scourged. Roman soldiers tied him to a column. These weren't soft ropes, they were whips embedded with bone fragments, metal tips, and bits of lead. This didn't take place just anywhere, but in the Praetorium of Jerusalem, the Roman military headquarters. And what survives to this day in Rome at the Basilica of Santa Prassede is the very column to which Jesus was said to have been bound. It's a reddish marble fragment just over half a meter tall. At first glance, it might look like nothing more than an old stone, but once you know what it represents, everything changes. It was likely brought to Rome by St. Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine, in the 4th century when she traveled to the Holy Land in search of relics from the Passion. Among the items she brought back, fragments of the cross, the nail, and this column. Today it stands in a small side chapel, far from the crowds. Protected by a gilded reliquary, it remains unshaken. Why is it considered a relic? Because it is believed to have been in direct physical contact with Jesus during the scourging. It doesn't bear a drop of blood, but it was a silent witness to one of the most harrowing episodes in the Gospels. While other relics shine, this column remains quiet, doesn't cry out, but it saw it all. And if it could speak, it would tell the story of a man who chose not to run from pain. The Spear of Destiny.
Spear of Destiny.
The crucified man no longer moved, but one of the soldiers, wanting to be sure he was truly dead, raised his spear and drove it straight into his side. From the wound flowed blood and water. That single act marked the end, and for many, also the beginning of everything. That spear, the one that pierced the body of Jesus, has been known for centuries as the Spear of Destiny. The Gospels tell us that upon seeing Jesus already dead on the cross, that soldier according to Christian tradition, was named Longinus. It's said that as he saw the blood and water pour out and gazed upon the lifeless Jesus, he became a believer in that very moment. But the story of the spear doesn't end there. Over the centuries, it came to be seen as an object of divine power. Emperors and conquerors sought it. Why? Because legend has it that whoever possesses the Spear of Destiny will never be defeated in battle. One of the most famous versions of this relic is housed in Vienna at the Imperial Treasury Museum. There, a spear is preserved said to have belonged to Emperor Charlemagne and later to Otto the Great. Even Hitler seized it in 1938 during the annexation of Austria, convinced that with it he would achieve total domination. But is it the real one? That spear is made of 8th century iron, but inside it contains a nail which many believe to be one of the original nails from Christ's crucifixion. In addition to the one in Vienna, there are other supposed holy spears in Armenia, Rome, and Krakow. None have been fully authenticated, but the mystery lives on. Unlike other relics, this one touches not only faith, but history, politics, and power. It's a relic and a legend, and that balance is what makes it truly unique. The nails of the crucifixion. 3 nails, that's all it took. 1 for each hand, 1 for the feet, the echo of a hammer striking flesh and bone, and those nails still exist. These are objects that, according to Christian tradition, pierced the body of Jesus and held him to the wood of the cross. The Gospels don't give many details. They simply state that he was crucified, a punishment reserved by the Romans for the most despised criminals. And crucifixion was never quick. It was slow, humiliating, and excruciating. The nails didn't go through the palms, but through the wrists where the body's weight could be supported. The position of the feet was equally brutal, a single nail driven through both, creating intense tension and forcing Jesus to push himself up with every breath. Over the centuries, at least 30 churches around the world have claimed to possess one of the original nails. But the church recognizes 4 major relics as the most likely candidates. Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, Monza Abbey, the Imperial Treasury of Vienna. Are they authentic? It's nearly impossible to know for sure. However, all 4 have centuries of documented history, have been venerated by popes, emperors, and millions of believers, and are considered sacred relics of the Passion. A curious detail, some of the nails were bent into the shape of a horseshoe, not by accident, but deliberately, as a sign they would never again be used for violence. And now the big question, why venerate an instrument of torture? Because for Christians, those nails don't represent defeat, but redemption. They are not symbols of death, but of love taken to its ultimate expression, the holy foreskin. Of all the relics considered sacred, this one is without a doubt the strangest, the most human, and for many, the most uncomfortable. But if Jesus was truly human, then this relic actually makes sense because it's the only part of his body that, logically speaking, wouldn't have resurrected. I'm talking about the holy foreskin. Yes, the small piece of skin that, according to tradition, was removed from Jesus when he was 8 days old as part of the Jewish ritual of circumcision. And as odd or even humorous as it may sound, this relic was venerated for centuries as one of the most sacred in all of Christianity. According to the Gospel of Luke, Jesus was circumcised on the 8th day, just like every Jewish boy. That moment was so significant. It's when he was officially given his name. What happened to that small piece of flesh removed at birth? During the Middle Ages, the holy foreskin became an object of great devotion and of many competing claims. At one point, at least 14 different foreskins were recorded across Europe, preserved in places like Calcutta. Others were said to exist in Antwerp, Rome, Santiago de Compostela, each city claiming to have the real one. One of the most famous cases is that of Calcutta, a tiny Italian village where the foreskin was mysteriously stolen in 1983 after being kept for centuries by a local priest. Since then, its whereabouts remain unknown. The story of the holy foreskin became so uncomfortable for the modern church that in 1900, the Vatican officially banned any public discussion of it. And by 1960, it was removed from the liturgical calendar altogether. Why was it considered a relic? Because it would be, quite literally, the only physical fragment of Jesus' body that could have remained on earth after his resurrection, a genuine bodily remnant of Christ, complete with DNA, blood, and humanity. The holy foreskin is the relic no one wants to name, but everyone finds fascinating. A blend of faith, history, and mystery that reminds us that in Christianity, God didn't become just spirit, he became flesh. The true cross, it wasn't made of gold, nor was it adorned with precious stones. It was just wood, rough, heavy, and cruel. But that cross, the one many once tried to hide, ultimately became the most powerful symbol in history. And yes, parts of that cross still exist. This is the true cross, the wooden beam on which, according to Christian tradition, Jesus of Nazareth was crucified. Crucifixion was the most humiliating punishment used by the Roman Empire, and the instrument was always the same: a wooden cross, typically made of cedar or pine, reused for dozens of condemned men. But in this case, that cross became the altar for the most remembered sacrifice of all time. What happened to it afterward? According to the most widespread account, the cross was buried near Calvary and forgotten for 3 centuries. Then in 326 AD, Saint Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine, traveled to the Holy Land with a clear goal: to find the remains of Christ's passion. They dug, they searched, and found 3 crosses. To determine which one was the true cross, tradition says they laid a gravely ill woman on each one. When she touched the 3rd, she was instantly healed. And thus, the legend of the Vera Cruz and the true cross was born. The cross was divided into fragments and distributed to different parts of the world. During the Middle Ages, it became one of the most coveted relics by kings and the Knights Templar. Each piece was preserved in gilded reliquaries, cherished with as much reverence as diamonds, as even though they were only splinters. Some of the most famous relics of the cross can still be found today in the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, Notre Dame Cathedral, the Monastery of Santo Toribio de Liébana, and dozens of churches scattered across Europe and the Holy Land. In the 19th century, the philosopher Voltaire famously quipped that there was so much wood from the true cross in circulation, you could build an entire ship out of it. But modern studies have shown that many of the fragments actually do date back to the 1st century and originate from the region of Judea. Are they truly from Christ's cross? That can't be definitively proven. But ultimately, it's not just about whether it's the exact wood. It's about what it represents. The Sudarium of Oviedo. Let me introduce you to the Sudarium of Oviedo, possibly the cloth that covered the face of Jesus after his death on the cross. In 1st century Jewish tradition, when someone died violently, it was customary to cover their face with a cloth while the body was being prepared for burial. That cloth is the Sudarium, a linen cloth measuring about 84 by 53 centimeters, stained with blood and bodily fluids. It doesn't display a visible image like the Shroud of Turin. But what matters isn't what you see, it's what the cloth contains. In the Gospel of John, chapter 20, it's written that when Peter and the other disciple entered the tomb, they saw the burial shroud lying there and the cloth that had covered Jesus' head rolled up separately. This small detail, often overlooked, directly ties to this relic. The Sudarium was protected in Jerusalem for centuries. When the Persians invaded in 614 AD, it was rescued by Christians and taken to Alexandria, then to Cartagena, Seville, and finally to Oviedo, Spain, where it has been preserved since the year 840. What does science say? Studies by the Spanish Center for Syndenology found that the blood on the Sudarium and on the Shroud of Turin is of the same type. AB, a very rare blood type, especially common in Middle Eastern populations. Moreover, the stains on the Sudarium match the anatomical features of the face seen on the shroud. In other words, 2 different cloths found in different places, yet they share the same blood and the same face. The marking suggests the Sudarium was placed on Jesus' face while he was still hanging on the cross right after his death. It remained there for about 45 minutes, soaking up blood and fluids from his lungs. It wasn't a ceremonial object, it was a silent witness to Christ's final breath. Why is it considered a relic? Because it touched Jesus' bloodied face directly after his death. and because it silently holds the most human expression of sorrow, that of a God who chose to die as a man. The Titulus Crucis. Remember the sign that, according to the Gospel of John, was placed above Jesus' cross during the Crucifixion? In Roman times, it was customary to place a sign above the condemned, stating their crime. In this case, the sign read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." What's remarkable, as the Gospel notes, is that it was written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, the languages of religion, power, and culture, a way to publicly announce the sentence, and the irony behind it. The relic believed to be the sign is preserved in the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, in Rome. For centuries, it remained hidden inside a secret compartment in the church. It was rediscovered in 1492, and since then has inspired both devotion and debate. The tablet is made of walnut wood, measures about 25 by 14 centimeters, and contains inscriptions in the 3 languages, misaligned and crudely carved by hand. Many experts believe it matches the style of signs the Romans used for public executions. Paleographic studies have shown that the script, particularly in the Hebrew and Greek, aligns with writing styles from the 1st century. Moreover, the grammatical mistakes suggest a non-native speaker with limited command of the languages, likely a Roman scribe working hastily and without expertise. In other words, everything lines up with what you'd expect from a sign quickly made for an execution. Of course, some question its authenticity, but many consider it one of the most powerful relics because it didn't touch Jesus' body, but declared who he was. And those words, once written in mockery, became the proclamation of faith for millions. The veil of Veronica. According to tradition, as Jesus walked the road to Calvary, a woman pushed through the crowd. Seeing his face covered in blood, sweat, and dust, she offered him a cloth to wipe himself. Jesus accepted. And when she pulled the cloth away, his face was miraculously imprinted on it. This woman does not appear in the canonical Gospels, but Christian tradition remembers her as Veronica, a name some interpret as derived from Vera Icona, meaning true image. This was not a painting, not embroidery, but, according to faith, a real reflection, a silent miracle, imprinted not with ink, but with suffering. So, where is this veil today? One of the oldest known versions is kept in the Vatican, inside St. Peter's Basilica, housed within a column high above the church. The veil measures approximately 17 by 24 centimeters, and the image is faint, almost faded by time. Some experts believe the relic may have been damaged or even replaced, but the tradition surrounding it has endured for centuries. Footprints. That stone still exists today inside the Chapel of the Ascension, an octagonal structure in Jerusalem. The site is currently under Muslim custodianship, but remains open to Christian visitors. And yes, you can still see what many believe to be the right footprint of Jesus, etched into the stone as if the ground itself witnessed and recorded his final step. There is no scientific evidence confirming the authenticity of the mark, yet there's also no clear geological explanation for how such a precise shape, complete with heel, arch, and toes, formed naturally on a rocky mountaintop. For believers, it's not just a physical imprint. It's a sign of presence, a trace of reality, a reminder that he walked among us and that his return to heaven was not a mere symbol, but a real and tangible event. Sometimes footprints don't fade. Some are etched not in sand, but in stone, as if the earth itself wanted to hold on to that moment. Are you fascinated by the world's religions? Then this video, or this one, is just what you need. I break it all down in a simple, clear, and easy to understand way. Want to support my work? Share the video, hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready, because what's coming next is absolutely unmissable.